Hello friends, today onwards we are going to start this journey of understanding the physiology in detail, and as and when required we will be trying to compare it and correlate it with the organon and philosophy as well. So let's get started friends, and let's start with the definition of the physiology. Physiology is a branch of biology that deals with the normal function of living organisms and their parts. So basically, under physiology, we study the normal functioning of each and every organ of the body and each and every part of the body, and we will try to understand how all these different organs and parts work together as a unit to ensure that the normal functioning of the body is carried on in a harmonious way. Now, in order for the ease of understanding, the different the body is divided into different compartments or systems like immune system, digestive system, cardiovascular system, integumentary system, respiratory system, endocrine system, reproductive system, excretory system, musculoskeletal system, and nervous system. It has to be very clearly kept in mind that these compartments, the division of the body into this compartment is done only for the sake of understanding and learning. When we compare it with the actual functioning that happens within the body, all these organs and all these compartments together work as a unit. They do not work in isolation friends, but these systems work together as a unit to ensure that the normal functioning of the body is carried on in a smooth way and harmonious way. Now let's first of all try to understand the basic composition of the body. Our body is mainly composed of water 60%, fat 20%, proteins 15%, carbohydrates 5%. Out of the 60% of this water we have within the body, 66% of that is within the intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid in the sense the fluid that is present within the cell, inside the cell, that is intracellular fluid, that constitute for about 66% of the whole water content that is there in the body, and the remaining 33% is present in the extracellular compartment or that we call it as extracellular fluid, that is the fluid that is present outside the cell. Now, when we talk about this extracellular fluid, the fluid that is present outside this cell, it is again divided into two compartments. The interstitial space. Interstitial space is the space that is present in between the two cells. In between multiple cells, the space that is occupied, the space that is there is occupied by this fluid, which is called as the interstitial fluid. And this interstitial fluid basically constitute for about 75% of the interstitial fluid constitute for about 75% of the water content that is present in the extracellular fluid compartment, and the remaining is there within the blood vessels, which is called as the intravascular. Intravascular means inside the blood vessels, that constitute for about the remaining 25%. Now, this extracellular fluid is rich in components like glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, ions like sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate. The intracellular fluid is rich in potassium, phosphate, and magnesium. Now, there is a constant balance that is maintained between the composition of the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, and this process of maintaining this dynamic equilibrium is known as homeostasis. And since this homeostasis is basically the maintenance of an state of balance between the intracellular compartment and the extracellular compartment. And for this to happen, there is always a constant exchange of ions and other materials in and across the cell through the various transport mechanisms, which we will see later as we go along in this journey. So to ensure that this balance is maintained, there is always a transport of components from intracellular compartment to the extracellular compartment and vice versa, so that this balance is maintained. So when we talk about defining the term homeostasis, it is a state of dynamic equilibrium. It is not a constant parameter that has a unit value or a predefined value, but it is a state of maintaining the dynamic equilibrium. Now there are various feedback homeostasis regulations because of which this balance is maintained. And this is how briefly this is the outline of briefly how these homeostasis regulations work. Whenever a stimulus, external or internal, causes a change in the variable in the sense anything that is fixed, anything that has that's value is fixed within the body, when there is a change in that, then the receptors receive that information that there has been a change in any variable. And these receptors, once they have received this information, they pass it on to the controlling unit through the afferent pathway. So this information that there has been a change in the variable is received by the receptor, and through the afferent pathway it is that information is passed on to the control system. So when this information is received at the control system will respond by producing an effect, and this effect can either enhance or oppose the original stimulus. So this is basically the outline how the homeostasis regulations work. Let's revise it again. Whenever there is a stimulus which causes any change in the variable, this change is received by the receptors, and these receptors convey this information to the controlling system through the afferent pathway. What constitutes the controlling system or control system, we will see that in the next coming slides. So once this information about the change in variable is received at the control system, this control system responds by causing an effect through the effector, and this effector either may further enhance the stimulus or oppose the stimulus. Now, whenever an effector is enhancing the original stimulus, that is called as the positive feedback mechanism, and when the effector oppose the original stimulus or bring down the original stimulus, then that is called as the negative feedback mechanism. Now let's see some of the examples of negative feedback mechanism. Thermoregulation. Thermoregulation is the process by which the normal body temperature is maintained. There can be various stimulus which can cause ups and downs in the normal or bring about a variation in the normal body temperature, and this process of thermoregulation ensures that the body temperature is maintained within the normal limit. Now let's see how this happens. Whenever there is a increase or rise in the normal body temperature, the receptors again receives this information that there has been a rise in the body temperature, and that information that has been received by the receptor is passed on to the hypothalamus. Now once this information is received at the hypothalamus, this hypothalamus will respond. In order to bring down the temperature back to normal, it responds by vasodilatation and sweating. Both this process, vasodilatation and sweating, will ensure that the body temperature is brought down to normal. When there is a lot of sweating, lot of heat is lost from the body, and when the lot of heat is lost from the body, the temperature automatically tends to come down. And this is exactly what happens when there is a vasodilatation. There is a lot of exchange, or there is a lot of loss of heat from the body, and because of that also again it further helps to bring down the body temperature back to normal. So this mechanism is quite simple, friends. Now see, you can see that the original stimulus has caused a rise in the body temperature, and the way the hypothalamus, after receiving that information through the receptor, is producing an effect by causing vasodilatation and sweating, which is basically opposing the original stimulus. Because of the original stimulus, the temperature of the body has gone up, and because of the effect that is coming through the effector, that is the way the hypothalamus is responding to it, it is bringing down the temperature. So basically it is opposing the original stimulus. The original stimulus was trying to basically rise the body temperature, and the effector is trying to bring down the body temperature. So basically it is opposing the original stimulus. So this is an example, typical example of negative feedback mechanism. This is exactly what happens even when the body temperature goes below the normal level. Let's see what happens. When the normal temperature falls below the normal limit, then this information is again received by the receptor, and this receptor relay this information or pass on this information to the hypothalamus. And once the hypothalamus receives this information, it again reacts through the effector, but this time the effect will be to increase the body temperature, so that the body temperature which has gone below normal is brought back to the normal level again. So this increase in body temperature is brought about by increasing the metabolic rate. When the metabolic rate increases, lot of heat is generated, and this heat will ensure to rise the body temperature back to normal. And at the same time, the body also causes shivering. Because of this shivering action, basically the loss of heat is prevented. A lot of heat is prevented from getting lost, exchange, and hence it also helps to maintain that body temperature and bring it back to normal. Rise that body temperature and bring it back to normal. Now in this case, in this example, you have seen that the original stimulus is bringing down the normal body temperature, and the response that has come from the controlling system, which is hypothalamus in this case, has produced a rise in the body temperature. So in this case also, the effector is opposing the original stimulus. So this is also an example of negative feedback mechanism. Then we have insulin mediated control of blood glucose. We all are aware that after eating, the blood sugar level increases. So there is a limit of there is a value which is within the limit as far as the blood glucose level is concerned, which we all know that it is in between 100 to 125 mg per dl. So after eating, especially after eating, this blood glucose level increases. So once this blood glucose level increases, this information is received by the receptor, and it is passed on to the pancreas, and this pancreas basically pass on this information. This pancreas basically then further secretes insulin, and this insulin, what it does is that it helps to transport these glucose which is present in the blood into the cells. So when the glucose is transported from the intravascular space to the cells, then automatically the blood glucose level drops down back to normal. So this is how it works. Again, now you can see that the original stimulus is causing a rise in the blood glucose level, and the effector is causing a decrease in the blood glucose level. So this is also an example of negative feedback mechanism. Negative feedback mechanisms are those mechanisms in which the effector basically opposes the original stimulus and bring down the original stimulus. Pituitary hormone release. This is yet another example where we can see the example of this feedback mechanism. Now we all know the normal values of T3 and T4 hormones is within the body, and whenever there is a rise in the T3 and T4 level because of any external stimulus, this T3 and T4 level increases above normal limit, then This information is again as usual received by the receptor, and this receptor pass on this information to the controlling system, which is the hypothalamus, and this hypothalamus in turn this hypothalamus in turn decreases the secretion of thyrotropin releasing hormone, and when the secretion of thyrotropin releasing hormone is decreased from the pituitary, the TSH secretion is also decreased. Anterior pituitary, the TSH secretion is also reduced, and when the TSH in the sense thyroid stimulating hormone, so when the secretion of thyroid stimulating hormone is decreased, then basically it helps to bring back the rise level of T3 and T4 back to normal. So this is how this mechanism work, and in this case you can also again clearly see that the original stimulus is causing a rise in T3 T4 level, and the effector is bringing down the level of T3 T4 level. The effector is acting to bring down the level of T3 and T4 levels. So this is again opposing the original stimulus. The effector is basically opposing the original stimulus. So this is also an example of negative feedback mechanism. Now let's see the example of positive feedback mechanism. Now it can be seen, the typical example we can see in during the pregnancy at the end of the third trimester, when the pregnancy period is completed, the head of the fetus will exert some pressure on the cervix. So when the cervix, when the pressure is exerted on the cervix by the head of the fetus, then the receptors receive this information, and this receptor, after receiving this information, it is passed on to the hypothalamus, and then from the hypothalamus there is a from the posterior pituitary there is an increased secretion of oxytocin. There is an increased secretion of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary, and because of this increased secretion of oxytocin, this oxytocin acts on the myometrium of the uterus, and when this hormone acts on the myometrium of the uterus, it further causes uterine contractions, and these uterine contractions further basically puts pressure on the cervix, and the baby is expelled. So basically here in this example you can see that the initial stimulus was causing a pressure on the cervix, and the response that came from the controlling system, that is the hypothalamus, also resulted in adding to that pressure, aided in increasing that pressure. So basically here the effector, whatever the effect is coming from the control system, is promoting or enhancing the original stimulus. The original stimulus was basically putting pressure on the cervix, and the effector, the reaction that came, is also putting pressure on the, helps to increase or enhance that pressure. So this is here the effector is basically enhancing the original stimulus, and this is a typical example of positive feedback mechanism.